Well, it's not every day that nvidia goes back and remasters one of your favourite first-person shooters, but that's what they've gone and done with Quake II RTX, the 1997 first-person shooter originally developed by id Software. Updated for a more modern age with real-time ray tracing, realistic lighting, shadowing and effects. Ray tracing's been a bit of a buzzword lately, but I think the best way to break it down into layman's terms is that it just allows for a much more realistic form of lighting. It's been used in games like Battlefield 5 and Metro Exodus, and anyone who's played those games I think can agree that they both look pretty damn good. Instead of needing separate algorithms for shadows, reflections, ambient occlusion and global illumination, RTX lighting combines all of that stuff in a much more unified way. It's tech that's been used in CGI in films for a while now, but only with this latest line of RTX cards is it able to be put to use in gaming, and what better way to show off all of that shit than with a game like Quake II. Now, I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert on the whole thing, and my knowledge extends as far as reading other people's articles on it. What I'm just trying to do is show off how cool it looks in Quake II. Also, keep in mind, this is just Quake II, with all of the new ray tracing features added in for the most part. Hasn't got any kind of gameplay or content overhaul. I mean, there's a few different textures, weapon models and things like that that have been modified, but otherwise it's unchanged. I know I say that like it's nothing though, when in fact there's over like 3,000 different textures these guys have had to go back in and change, so yeah, damn. My point is, this isn't a review for Quake II. If that's what you're after, you can go and watch the video I did for it a couple of years back when my microphone sounded like it was made out of a tin of baked beans. Quake II RTX has just become a bit of a pissing contest to see how much cool looking stuff they can pack in. And there really is a whole heap of cool looking stuff they've packed into this version. It's kinda staggering. If you already got a copy of Quake II, you can download the RTX version off Steam for free and just jump right in. If you somehow don't own Quake II, in which case shame on you, well, there's still a demo available that's got the first 3 levels. Be warned though that downloading that demo is going to let everyone know you're a filthy casual. Anyway, among a whole slew of stuff that's been added in, and what I think is one of the better ones is a night and day cycle that really changes the look and feel of some of the levels. You can modify this however you want, changing the sky type to either Earth or Strogos. You can mess around with the time of day or even the position of the sun. It's kind of insane that something so simple can be modified so quickly and in real time. You can even adjust the latitude of the planet, making daytime last longer if you want to. Or maybe you want to adjust the brightness of the sun and its angle. Well, guess what? You can do that too. So if you want your journey through the game to feel more genuine, including proper day and night cycles, well, there's the option to do that, just if you really wanted to get immersed in the whole thing. Such a simple setting, but it has a huge effect on the lighting and the atmosphere for certain missions, which is oddly juxtaposed with the Quake II engine's blocky and simplistic level design. And along with that, you've got dynamic lighting for signs, elevators, and switches. Now, weapon and level textures have either been completely updated or replaced entirely. Certain weapons such as the super shotgun, the hyper blaster, and the chain gun have barrels that reflect back the entire game world. Same thing with computer terminals and windows, they now cast real-time reflections, and you can even see the reflection of Bitterman in some of them as well. And it's just kinda surreal to see that in a game as old as Quake II. Even the spare rockets on the rocket launcher also now reflect back the entire game world. Water reflections are great too, and also highly realistic. The new texture for the grenade launcher I think is also kind of badass. You can see all these little scratches on the back of it, and the new explosion particles make it way more fun to use. I mean, kind of. The railgun and the hyper blaster light up almost an entire room when you're firing them, which, along with all the other bells and whistles the visuals are pulling off, just looks awesome. Oh, and you're probably wondering what the BFG looks like. Well, I'll show you. Obviously though, the main thing is this RTX renderer itself, and comparing this to OpenGL is really chalk and cheese. They're not even in the same ballpark, it's not even the same sport. The times when you notice the difference in lighting the most is obviously during areas that have natural light, and this is when it just looks staggeringly different to OpenGL and also staggeringly better. But I think even some of the interior areas just look gorgeous at times, like where I just had to stop for a bit and spend a few seconds admiring the whole thing, like some asshole window shopping in a red light district. This was part of the fun for me of going through the whole thing and stopping when I got to areas I recognised from the original game, then switching the renderer to see how they originally used to look. and some of these changes make the game feel entirely different. Here's just a few examples. Volumetric lighting is a pretty big addition as well, and it makes certain sections look fantastic. Like when you see all these nice looking god rays coming in from the rooftop. It's great. Reminds me of some kind of tech demo you'd see back in the day. I think the contrast with the lighting is pretty awesome as well, like some of the areas in the game are just now realistically dark, and you have to use a flare gun or else you won't be able to see jack shit. This can be to the detriment of certain areas though, because enemy placements are still the same. Luckily though, you've got the flare gun to light all of these parts up, so it shouldn't be that much of an issue. But what does annoy me though is that it takes so long to swap weapons in Quake II. So quickly swapping to the flare gun while you're under fire can be really dangerous. But at least it does highlight the vast differences in how the lighting looks between each renderer. Going into this thing, I had no idea there was going to be this much stuff to play around. And I think anyone who just kind of looks at this footage and thinks it looks like hot garbage is probably overlooking the amount of customization that's on offer here. And I think there's enough settings in here that anyone could play around with this stuff and get it looking appealing for them personally. Where it all starts to become a bit of a hot mess though is when you start to break down all of the performance. Now, I'm running this with the GTX 2070, which nvidia were kind enough to supply. And with the resolution scale set to 100%, I'm able to get pretty much like a constant 60 frames per second. Though, for someone like me who's become used to playing games at 144Hz and upwards, I mean going back to 60 frames per second is like going from eating at a steakhouse to eating minute steaks from a petrol station. When I whack that up to 150% though, which is the max, the game drops down to around 20 or so frames, and it just stutters like crazy. Obviously, cranking that setting up to high needs some of the big boy cards, like the 2080 or the 2080 Ti, though both those cards are expensive as fuck. And I can't really justify spending $2,000 on an nvidia 2080 Ti just so I can play a Quake II remaster at the highest resolution. To put it into perspective, I'm also running an 8770K and 16GB of RAM. So yeah, this renderer is a bit of a resource hog. In fact, you know what? It's a goddamn resource stealer, is what it is. It steals resources. Remember when people used to run Crysis to test their new graphics cards? Yeah, well now people are running Quake II. I mean, what an odd time to be alive. The issue though is that at a resolution scale of 100%, the game is kinda blurry, and it feels like I'm squinting when I look at the screen because of how soft some of the edges are. The overall image lacks any real kind of clarity, and I'd argue the OpenGL settings look sharper than this. This is where you see the infancy a bit with the technology, and hopefully this kind of thing will be better optimized with future titles. There's a couple of settings in there too that I didn't really understand. I mean, the difference between having global illumination on medium or high is minuscule and barely noticeable. It's also supposed to affect performance, but it didn't really seem to do that on my end. Denoising is another setting that confuses me, because having it turned off makes the whole screen look crap, so I don't really see the purpose of needing to turn this off, considering having it off is borderline unplayable. Same thing with changing the perspective mode from cylindrical to perspective. On cylindrical, it makes the game look like it's been filmed with a GoPro. Lastly, this version adds in multiplayer support, though it's a complete pain in the ass finding a server with anyone playing, especially a server that has a ping that's less than 200. But I'm sure some people somewhere in the world are at least able to play this, just not me. Quake II RTX at the end of the day is a bit of a weird package. I mean, in its purest form, it's really just a way of showing off the capabilities of an RTX card, and showing off how much different and arguably better RTX rendering can look. People who are hardcore Quake II fans though probably won't like this thing all that much, because it does, like I said before, fundamentally change how the game feels. But then again, it's not really aimed at these kind of people. None of the cinematics work and there's no music either, so you'll have to dick around to get all that stuff going. If you just bought this expecting some kind of Quake II remaster, well, you might be disappointed in that regard. And I don't think I'd suggest this for a first time playthrough either. I reckon you're better off playing through the whole game as it was intended, and if you want to try and play RTX afterwards, then go for it and then see which one you prefer. Some people on the Steam forums are reporting bugs too, like game crashes, save files being deleted or corrupted, but I didn't really experience any of that in the entire time I played it, so I can't really comment on that. I don't know if I'd say that this thing justifies buying an RTX card alone, but there are a few upcoming games like Doom Eternal and Cyberpunk 2077 that are going to make use of ray tracing, so it is definitely something to consider for future-proofing. Quake II RTX was fun for the most part though, and a neat example of some burgeoning technology. The whole mechanic of being able to mess around with things like the brightness of the sun and the time of day is something I found really cool. And I'd love to see them give this kind of treatment to more older games. And I'll be keen to see if that works in bringing interest back into some of these older titles. And if nothing else, I still had a good time replaying through Quake II again after all these years.